We are continuing our discussion of what is at stake in the 2024 election. Now, as I've told so many of you before, I don't do the thing that lots of corporate media does, where they say the most important election of our times every single election. And I'll give you an example. In 2012, when Barack Obama was running for re-election against Mitt Romney, right, I made it very clear that I supported Barack Obama over Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney's economic views, as well as his views on social issues, did not line up with mine. And the candidate that was closest to me was Barack Obama. And thus I voted for Obama and I supported Obama. And it was a good thing that Barack Obama defeated Mitt Romney. But I certainly was not telling you this is the most important election of our time. And in fact, if Mitt Romney had become president, we would have had disagreements on tax policy. We would have had some disagreements on foreign policy and all sorts of different policy. But it would not have been the existential threat to our democracy that Donald Trump, having been reelected in 2020, would have been. Thankfully, that didn't happen. And it would not have been the extraordinary threat to everything that many of us hold dear that it would be if Trump were to be reelected in 2024. So it is really important to understand what the stakes are as we now have a year, almost to the day, a year left before the 2024 election. Here is another vignette of what this danger and threat is. There is now very good reporting that Trump and his team have the idea of immediately deploying the military to police the streets of the United States on day one if Donald Trump is elected. The Daily Beast reports the former president's allies are developing a plan that would immediately deploy the military to the streets against potential demonstrators. This is absolutely horrifying. According to a Washington Post report yesterday, the drafting of such plans has been largely unofficially outsourced to a coalition of right-wing think tanks working under the title Project 2025. We've talked about Project 2025 and the authoritarian dictatorial nightmare that it is. It was identified and as immediate priority for the hypothetical resurrected Trump administration to deploy to the streets. In response to questions from the Post, Trump campaign spokesman Stephen Chung provided a statement. President Trump is focused on crushing his opponents, blah, blah, blah. However, citing people who have spoken to him, the Post also reported Trump remarked in private conversations he wants to use the Justice Department to go after his enemies, including former members of his own administration, like John Kelly, Bill Barr, and Mark Milley. And importantly, there is the idea of this plan of also deploying military to the streets to police the streets against demonstrators. Now, let's talk about that in some detail. It's crazy that there are people who will vote for this guy at all, but that's the country we have. And so sitting here lamenting, oh my goodness, how is it that anyone's willing to vote for this guy? The United States is in a dark place. There are tens of millions of people who are going to vote for this guy. There are people who will vote for this guy whether he's in prison or not. And in fact, him being in prison might help him among some of his electorate. Nothing is going to sway his supporters. It is a cult. It's like Jim Jones in Jonestown. It's like, pick whatever, the Branch Davidians and David Koresh, whatever you want to pick. So what we have to hope for is that if and when he finally becomes the official Republican nominee, it will motivate the sane people to go out and vote against him. That's the hope. We have to hope for that. There is a real legal question. We've talked before about using the military for domestic law enforcement. Why have we talked about it before? Because Trump always seems to love the idea. The ability to tell the military go and police the streets is limited by something called the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. The pronunciation really doesn't matter. What matters is you're not really allowed to do this. It's a federal statute, and it says the federal government can really only in extraordinarily extenuating circumstances deploy military personnel to enforce domestic policy in the United States. There are a few exceptions. When can the federal government say we're sending the federal military to enforce the law? It's actually quite ironic. One of the exceptions to this act is the Insurrection Act of 1807, and I know you know where we're going with this. One of the situations where a president can deploy the military to enforce the law within the United States is in the case of insurrection and rebellion. If what is happening on the streets of the country is so insane that it qualifies as an attempt at insurrection or rebellion, then you are allowed to deploy the military. So think about that. The only reasonable deployment of the military in this capacity for years would have been to quell the very Trumpist insurrection that Trump incited after 2020 to try to steal an election that he actually lost. It's mind-blowing that that is actually a legitimate exception, but it would be applied against Trump supporters when they tried their insurrection. Now, there's some other exceptions, national emergencies, certain other specific conditions where Congress can authorize military action within the United States in extraordinary circumstances. And it's important to remember that the military is not trained for policing. Yes, there's a subsection of folks in the military who are military police. They are trained specifically to function as law enforcement within military contexts. But when you deploy a military for domestic law enforcement, it can have an escalatory effect. It can escalate the situation rather than calm the situation. Using the military against civilians can lead to excessive force. It can lead to human rights violations, and it can be an intimidating presence that only makes whatever problem you think you've identified worse. So we can look at some examples. 1957, the Little Rock Nine situation, where the military was deployed to ensure that when black kids were going to schools, as the integration of schools started, that they weren't going to be attacked. You can look at the 68 Chicago riots, the 1992 LA riots, 2005 and Hurricane Katrina. Some governors used state national guards in 2020 when certain protests got out of hand, but that is not the federal government deploying federal military. So this is an extraordinarily dangerous direction to go. And unfortunately, Trump seems to have a plan to do it. Yet another reason why we really have to make sure that this guy does not get another 4 years. So I wrote another book for kids. The first book was Think Like a Detective. The point of the first book was to teach kids critical thinking, which Republicans don't want them to learn, because when kids learn critical thinking, they don't vote for Republicans. The new book is Think Like a Scientist. This is a fun adventure teaching kids the scientific method. Again, Republicans aren't big on kids learning the scientific method because when they do, they're less likely to fall for Republican lies about climate change and vaccines and so many other things. You can get the new book as well as the first one at davidpakman.com/book. This is part of the Adventures in Thinking series. Can you imagine that we're doing this? We are. davidpakman.com/book. 13,500 copies of the first book have sold. I'll bring you an update soon on sales for the second book. Think Like a Scientist, davidpakman.com/book.